He was hailed as one of the greatest producers in music history, a reclusive genius who revolutionized sound, worked with the biggest legends of the 20th century, and left behind a legacy of iconic hits. But Phil Spector's name would later be remembered not for symphonic pop masterpieces, but for a chilling murder inside a Los Angeles mansion. The man who created the wall of sound would end up behind the walls of a prison, his brilliance undone by obsession, paranoia, and a gun. Phil Spector's story starts in the Bronx, where he was born in 1939. His father died by suicide when Phil was just 9 years old, a trauma that haunted him for the rest of his life. His mother later moved the family to Los Angeles, where the lonely, awkward teenager buried himself in music. In high school, Spector was already experimenting with songwriting and sound engineering. He wasn't a performer, he didn't have the look or the charisma, but he had an ear. A brilliant, revolutionary ear. At just 18, he co-wrote and produced "To Know Him Is to Love Him," a hit song performed by his band, the Teddy Bears. The title came straight from his father's gravestone. That song hit number one on the Billboard charts in 1958, and it was only the beginning. In the 1960s, Spector became a force in the recording industry. He wasn't content with traditional pop arrangements. He layered instruments, used echo chambers, and stacked harmonies to create an overwhelming, majestic sound. It became known as the Wall of Sound, and it changed pop music forever. Spector produced hits like "Be My Baby" and "Baby I Love You" for the Ronettes. "He's a Rebel" for the Crystals, and "You've Lost That Lovin' Feelin'" for the Righteous Brothers. Each song sounded like a symphony pressed into 3 minutes of wax. Artists and producers around the world, especially a young Brian Wilson, were obsessed with what Spector was doing in the studio. He was called a genius, a madman, and sometimes both. By his early 30s, Phil Spector was one of the most powerful men in music. But power didn't bring him peace. Behind the scenes, he was battling severe mental health issues. Friends and colleagues described him as controlling, reclusive, and deeply insecure. He became known for his unpredictable behavior, temper tantrums, and increasingly erratic personality. He didn't just want perfection, he demanded it, often through psychological intimidation. One of his most complicated relationships was with Ronnie Bennett, lead singer of the Ronettes. They married in 1968, but their relationship was anything but romantic. Ronnie later claimed she was essentially held prisoner in his mansion. She wasn't allowed to leave without permission, and he kept her under strict surveillance. According to her, he even hid her shoes to prevent her from running away. Eventually, she escaped barefoot and filed for divorce. It was one of the first public glimpses into how controlling and dangerous Phil Spector could be when the studio lights were off. In the 1970s, Spector's grip on the music world started to loosen. The pop sound was changing, and Spector wasn't evolving with it. He produced albums for John Lennon, George Harrison, and Leonard Cohen. But even those collaborations were marked by tension. Stories of Spector waving guns around in the studio began to surface. Musicians said he was drunk, erratic, and terrifying to be around. He reportedly held a gun to Leonard Cohen's neck during a session. He pointed a pistol at Dee Dee Ramone. He even allegedly fired a gun inside a studio during a session with John Lennon. But Spector's legacy and influence kept most people from holding him accountable. After all, he was Phil Spector, the eccentric genius. His behavior was chalked up to artistic madness. That indulgence would prove fatal. By the 1980s and 1990s, Spector had all but vanished from public view. He lived in a sprawling, heavily guarded mansion called Pyrenees Castle in Alhambra, California. He rarely gave interviews and was seen only occasionally. Rumors swirled about his mental state. He collected guns, wore bizarre wigs, and lived in isolation. The genius was now a recluse, consumed by paranoia and delusions of grandeur. Then, on February 3rd, 2003, the curtain fell. That night, actress Lana Clarkson, a struggling performer working at the House of Blues, met Spector while she was working at the VIP lounge. He invited her back to his mansion. At around 5 a.m., a chauffeur waiting outside heard a gunshot. Moments later, Spector walked out holding a pistol and said, "I think I killed someone." Inside, Lana Clarkson was dead, shot through the mouth. She was slumped in a chair, her purse still on her shoulder. The case was an instant media storm. Phil Spector, the legendary producer, was now the prime suspect in a murder investigation. He claimed Clarkson's death was an accidental suicide, that she kissed the gun. But the evidence said otherwise. Her purse was still on her shoulder. She hadn't been there long enough to grow suicidal. And Spector's history with guns and erratic behavior came crashing down around him. Investigators discovered multiple women who had similar stories. Spector would become drunk, pull a gun, and threaten them if they tried to leave. These weren't isolated incidents. They were a pattern, a terrifying one. But in 2007, Spector's first trial ended in a hung jury. His defense team had created just enough doubt to avoid a conviction. But prosecutors weren't done. In 2009, they retried the case, and this time the outcome was different. The evidence, the testimony from previous victims, and Spector's own bizarre courtroom appearance helped seal the verdict. He was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to 19 years to life. The man who once stood behind the world's biggest recording consoles now stood behind bars, a convicted killer. Spector's mugshot went viral. The wigs were gone. The Hollywood shine had disappeared. What remained was a gaunt, broken man who had once shaped the very sound of American pop music, and now sat in a prison jumpsuit, convicted of taking a life. Even from prison, Spector remained a figure of fascination. Some fans tried to separate the music from the man. Others couldn't. How could you listen to Be My Baby without hearing the darkness that eventually followed? How do you celebrate a man who terrorized women and used guns as a means of control? These were the questions that haunted his legacy until the very end. Phil Spector died in January 2021 at the age of 81 due to complications from COVID-19 while still serving his sentence. There was no star-studded tribute, no Grammy salute. His death brought closure, but also renewed conversations about power, abuse, and how long the industry enabled his behavior because of his talent. Spector's legacy is one of contradiction. He helped create the modern pop sound, mentored music legends, and shaped the soundtrack of a generation. But his genius came at a cost, paid not just by himself, but by the people who lived in fear around him. Lana Clarkson paid the ultimate price. Her life, career, and future were stolen in a moment of violence. And while Phil Spector's music might still echo through speakers and playlists, it will forever carry the shadow of a man who couldn't control the demons that consumed him. In the end, the story of Phil Spector isn't just about a fall from grace. It's about the warning signs we ignore, the myths we build around brilliance, and how genius without accountability can become something monstrous. He built walls of sound that changed music, but he also built walls around himself, hiding behind them until the truth came crashing in. If these deep dives into the dark sides of fame interest you, subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories where genius turns dangerous. What do you think? Can a legacy of music survive when the man behind it falls so far? Or does Phil Spector's fate prove that brilliance is never an excuse for violence?